At the Christmas party at my aunt's house 1 year ago, my uncle asked me about my job. His voice came out laced with sarcasm as he said, "So, Madison still working at that coffee shop?" After that question, I answered with complete confidence, "Yes, I still am." But as the co-founder of 21 coffee shops operating across 5 states, after I said that, no one believed me. They thought I was making it up just because someone had seen a photo of me wearing a server uniform from the shop at some point. To make it worse, my father Caleb publicly called me a disgrace right there in the middle of the party, just because he believed I had made up something too outrageous. So, what decisions did I make after that? Keep listening. This is my story. Hi everyone, my name is Madison. I'm 32 years old and live in a quiet neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. My best friend Brian and I currently own 21 coffee shops across 5 states. We started this journey 5 years ago with a small rental space and used nothing but our savings. No loans, no help from family. Even though I now have a stable job, a good income, and a house worth nearly $600,000, I still choose to live quietly. Unlike many people, I avoid talking about my accomplishments. That decision traces back to something that happened 7 years ago. Back then, in a moment of pride, I tried too hard to prove myself and said too much at the wrong time. My father and younger sister were the ones who made me pay the price for it. Since that day, I promised myself that no matter how far I went or how much success I achieved, I would never brag about what I had, especially in front of my family. But last Christmas, I broke that promise. I slipped and said one line that seemed harmless at the time, but that was all they needed. The very people who once looked down on me finally had a chance to tear me down, right in front of everyone. In early December last year, when the Christmas spirit had just settled into every street corner, I got a phone call from Aunt Lauren. I hadn't heard her voice in 7 years. After a few cautious pleasantries, she asked if I could come home with the whole family for this year's Christmas party. I stayed silent for a long moment, about to say no, like I had so many times before. But before I could get a word out, she gently added, "Everyone misses you." I didn't answer right away, but that night I couldn't sleep. I wasn't sure if they really missed me, or if they just missed the old version of me, the one who used to be vulnerable. Maybe it was curiosity. Perhaps part of me still wanted to believe in something good. Either way, I decided to go back on Christmas Day. After nearly 2 hours from Portland to Salem, I pulled up in front of her house as the clock struck 11:00 a.m. While I was trying to find a parking spot, a familiar voice called out from behind me on the right, loud enough for the whole yard to hear, "7 years and you're still driving that thing? Looks like nothing's changed." I turned around. It was Peter, my cousin. He was leaning against a brand new SUV with his arms crossed, wearing a look that was part mocking, part satisfied. I looked at him for a few seconds, exhaled quietly through my nose, and smiled instead of saying anything. I didn't want to let Peter get to me. I didn't come back here to argue with anyone. After I parked the car, I grabbed the gift bag I had prepared the night before. Inside were a few bottles of wine, not expensive, but classy enough to show respect. As soon as I stepped into the living room, I saw 2 people I hadn't seen in 7 years, my dad and my younger sister. They stood in the corner of the room, close to the big Christmas tree by the wall. Their eyes landed on me for only 3 seconds before quickly turning away. I didn't walk over to them. Instead, I nodded at the nearby relatives, answered a few polite questions about work and health, and kept my smile just enough to be respectful. A moment later, Aunt Lauren came out of the kitchen. When she saw me, she took off her oven mitts, rushed toward me, and hugged me tightly. Her voice trembled, but there was a strange warmth in it. "Welcome home." At that moment, I thought maybe this time would be different. Perhaps today would be the day I could finally feel like I belonged here, even just once after 7 years away. But I didn't know that this very day would begin another collapse, this time right in front of everyone. About 15 minutes after I arrived, the party officially began. I sat at the end of the table next to a few younger cousins. Looking around, I figured it had been long since my family had gathered in such a big group. On the table were all the classic holiday dishes: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, buttered rolls, cream soup, and several trays of homemade desserts. I glanced at how everything was arranged, noticed the hot dishes were still steaming, and knew immediately that Aunt Lauren must have spent the whole morning preparing it all. Aunt Lauren is my mother's younger sister. Back when Mom was still alive, she used to stop by our house often, always bringing sweet pastries and bags of sun-warmed fruit from her backyard. But after Mom passed away nearly 10 years ago, Aunt Lauren rarely came around anymore, and the reason she stopped visiting was my father. I still remember the few rare times she came by after the funeral. My dad didn't bother hiding his irritation. He would start scowling when he opened the door and make offhand remarks about how we didn't need anyone's pity. Once, while my sister and I were laughing and chatting with her, he suddenly stood up and roared, "If that's the kind of visit this is, don't bother. I can take care of my kids." After moments like that, I never saw her come back again. Back to that day's party. About 30 minutes into the meal, just as laughter began rising from the far end of the table, Uncle Andrew, Peter's father, suddenly turned to me. His voice cut clearly through the noise in the room. "So, Madison still working at the coffee shop?" At that moment, the room seemed to pause. Almost everyone turned to look at me. I could feel them waiting for an answer. Uncle Andrew asked that question because he had a short business trip to Portland 3 years earlier. By coincidence, he walked into one of my coffee shops. 2 employees had called in sick with the flu that day and the shop was packed, so I wore the uniform and stepped in to help, just like any regular barista. When he walked in and saw me behind the counter in uniform, he froze for just a moment. I saw the surprise in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. I didn't explain. I nodded at him like I would to any customer, then carried a coffee over to the corner table. I never thought he'd mention it again, but a few days later, the messages started coming. Sarcastic texts, some even with laughing emojis and a photo of me in uniform. It didn't take long to figure out where it all started. One night I got a message from my father. No build-up, just one sentence. "You embarrass me." I didn't reply. At that point, my father and I had long lost connection. 3 years later, right in the middle of a Christmas party, Uncle Andrew brought it up again, using that moment to take a jab. His tone was steady, but his eyes gave away the mockery. I sat still, my hand resting on the spoon, thinking I'd just let it pass like I always did. But something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the sideways glance from my father across the table. Perhaps it was the faint laugh I heard from a relative nearby. Right then, I lifted my head, looked straight at Uncle Andrew, and calmly said, "Yes, I still do, but now as the co-founder of 21 coffee shops operating in 5 states. The table fell quiet. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. I noticed a few people exchanging glances. Some just stared at me. Then suddenly, Peter, Uncle Andrew's son, burst out laughing. He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh man, listen to this. It sounds like one of those TikTok bros talking about their $1 million startup. That's some wild fiction." A few others chuckled. One of my aunts to the left nodded and said just loud enough, "Yeah, founder, but still serving tables. Something about that doesn't add up." Someone else chimed in, "Exactly. Anyone can say that. I could also call myself the owner of a 5-star restaurant if all it took was talk." The laughter started spreading around the table. Glances, nods, quiet snickers, with no effort to hide them. At that moment, I looked around the room and felt like I had just turned myself into a joke in the middle of a circus, with my family as the audience. But strangely, I didn't feel ashamed. The only thing I noticed was my father's eyes. He wasn't laughing, he didn't speak. He just stared at the wine glass in front of him, as if he had just heard something he hadn't fully processed yet. About a minute after I finished speaking, as the last bits of laughter finally faded, the space around the dinner table fell into a kind of silence that didn't have a name. It felt like everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. I just sat there, my hand resting lightly on the edge of the chair, no strong emotion left inside me. And then, just as I expected, my father spoke. His voice was slow, low, and tightly restrained. "You're embarrassing me. Who do you think you are, saying you own 21 coffee shops? Would you still drive that old car if you were that successful?" Right after those words, I turned to look at him. His face was flushed red, and his eyes locked onto me with nothing held back. The tension at the table was so thick it felt frozen in the air. A few seconds later, my younger sister, Brody, spoke up from across the table. Her voice was louder this time, sharper. "You're always like this, always trying so hard to stand out, working in a coffee shop, being caught in uniform, and still acting like you're special." After hearing all that, I didn't say a word. I just raised one eyebrow slightly and took a slow, deep breath. I heard my father's wine glass slam hard against the table. The sound was loud enough to pull everyone's attention back. The next moment, he stood up, glaring at me like he had just discovered something disgusting in his house. He shouted, "Get out of here and don't ever show your face to this family again, you reeking disgrace." That was when I knew I had no reason to stay, not because I was hurt, but because I finally saw it clearly. The people who once called me family had only been waiting for a chance to push me out again. This time, they did it openly, without mercy. Just as I quietly slid my chair back to stand up, a voice rang out from the head of the table, clear and firm. "That's enough, Caleb. The one who should leave this party is you, not Madison. You need to remember this is my house. You're a guest, and you don't have the right to kick anyone out of my home." The entire room froze. No one expected the voice to come from Aunt Lauren. Her tone wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to make the whole table hold its breath for a few seconds. She looked at my father, her eyes free of the usual softness. She wasn't angry, but how she stood up, kept her back straight, and delivered every word made the room feel heavier than any raised voice could. Then she turned to Uncle Andrew. Her voice stayed calm, but she didn't hold back this time. "Andrew, I hope this is the last time you mock someone in my house. The same goes for Peter. Teach your son some respect." Peter stared down at the table while Uncle Andrew muttered under his breath, I'm sorry, Lauren." His apology was so quiet that only the people closest could hear it. I wasn't surprised by Aunt Lauren's words. I had long known she saw everything. She just chose not to interfere. But today, she stood up for me right there at the table, in front of all the people who for years had made me feel like nothing more than an outsider. She turned back to me, her eyes softened, and her voice lowered, steady but warm. "Stay, Madison. As long as I'm here, no one will push you around." At that moment, I could feel the protection in her voice. I nodded slightly, looked at her, and said, "Thank you, Auntie, but I have something at the shop I need to take care of." That line was just an excuse to leave, and I knew she understood. But instead of trying to stop me with words, she just let out a soft sigh and said, "Then wait a moment for me." About 10 minutes later, as I zipped up my coat and stepped onto the front porch, she returned with a carefully packed bag of food. She placed it into my hands, looked at me, and said nothing. At that moment, I felt a sting rise at the bridge of my nose. Not out of sadness, and not exactly out of gratitude either. It was the quiet ache of realizing that after all these years, someone in my family still cared enough not to let me walk away empty-handed. About 2 hours later, I arrived at one of our familiar locations in Portland. Everything was as it always was, the sound of grinders humming, the scent of freshly brewed coffee hanging in the air, and soft jazz floating from the ceiling speakers. A few staff members behind the counter gave me a quick nod as I walked in. I returned it with a slight nod and the same familiar smile I'd given every day for 5 years, even on the worst days. When I made my way to the bar, Luca, who was on the machine then, immediately stepped aside without a word. He didn't need me to say anything. Like every other barista in our stores, Luca knew that I always liked to make my coffee, especially at the end of the day or after something that left my mind running. About 10 minutes later, I brought my cup to my usual spot by the window. It was private enough, but still close enough to observe the entire cafe. I sat down, set the cup on the table, and leaned back into the chair, like I had returned to the safest place I knew. After the first few sips, the soft bitterness and hint of acidity from the beans began to bring my body back to life. My mind started to clear. But as my eyes wandered through the large glass window, I suddenly realized I remembered what happened 7 years ago. Not because I wanted to, but after what happened this afternoon, that memory felt like it had been pulled back into the present, sharp, vivid, and still carrying that familiar sting somewhere deep in my chest. 7 years ago, on a weekend afternoon, I had just gotten home from work when I saw my father sitting in the living room with a newspaper. Barely past the second page, he called me over and said he had something to discuss. His tone was calm, like he was about to talk about something completely ordinary. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. My younger sister was there too, sitting at the corner of the table, headphones on. But I saw her glance over when our dad started speaking. My father looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I'm planning to leave this house to your sister. She needs a stable place to start after graduation." I sat still for a few seconds. The sentence was short, but it hit me in a way I couldn't explain. I asked him again, my voice low but clear, "What about me?" He didn't look at me when he answered, and he didn't hesitate. "You already have a job. You make good money. You can take care of yourself. Your sister might not land a decent job after school like you did. At that moment, I gently clasped my hands on my lap to stay calm. Then I said, "Do you remember who's been covering most of her senior year tuition? A girl who's only been working for a little over a year, sending money back every month like clockwork on the 15th? No one responded. My sister still had her headphones on, but she had obviously paused the music long ago. I looked straight at her and asked, "You don't have anything to say?" She didn't look back, just replied briefly, "This is Dad's decision. I'm not getting involved." I nodded slowly, not saying anything more. That night, I packed my things and moved out. No arguments, no one asked me to stay. Everything happened in this strange, quiet way, like they had been waiting for me to leave. And from that day until now, I haven't gone back. 7 years ago, my mistake was telling them how much I made. I had just graduated and landed a job at a finance company. My income wasn't less than $70,000 a year after taxes, and I bragged about it to my father. After that, I learned to live differently. I stopped showing off to anyone and kept my income to myself. After the day my father announced he would leave the house to my sister, I didn't say another word. That night, I packed my things, called a ride, and left with nothing but the old backpack I had used in college. No one saw me off, no one called after me. I rented a small apartment on the outskirts of Portland, more than a 30-minute drive from work. It wasn't spacious or fancy, but it was clean and quiet enough for me to start over. At the time, I wasn't earning a small salary. Working in finance, I made over $70,000 yearly after taxes, more than enough to live comfortably if I wanted. But when I left home, I chose to live modestly. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to feel what it meant to be fully in control again. I wanted to know exactly where every dollar went and prove I could stand alone without leaning on anyone. I cooked my meals, set a clear budget, and saved a fixed monthly amount. Not to buy a house, not to get a new car. I just wanted a cushion so that if I decided to start something of my own one day, I could. Then, 2 years later, on a Friday evening, Brian, my best friend from college, asked to meet at a small coffee shop. He brought a business plan draft with him and said he wanted to open an independent cafe. "It's just a small space with real quality, not another cookie-cutter franchise," he said. "Do you want to start it with me?" At first, I hesitated, but when I looked into Brian's eyes and saw how committed he was, I knew that if I didn't leap, I might regret it for the rest of my life. After deciding to join him, I withdrew all the savings I had built over those 2 years, and we opened our first cafe. We named it Elm and Cedar. It sat on a quiet corner of Alberta Street in Portland. The early days were incredibly tough. We built our shelves, painted the walls ourselves, rented used machines, and took turns running the shop from morning to night. Some days it rained nonstop and we sold only 3 cups. Some days, the espresso machine broke right at peak hour. We were sore all over at night, but still had to go through the books line by line, down to every receipt. Then the regulars started to show up. Some dropped by every Monday morning. Some claimed one corner of the cafe and never changed their order all year. A year later, we opened our second location in Beaverton, then Salem, then Seattle. Each city was a brand new lesson. We had to learn how to hire, manage, and protect the soul of the brand no matter where we were. And just like that, 5 years after leaving that tiny apartment and making one choice I never looked back on, we now own 21 coffee shops across 5 states. While I was sitting in my usual corner of the cafe, my mind drifting through the memories that had just resurfaced, my phone buzzed lightly. A notification from Instagram popped up and pulled me back to the present. I opened it out of habit, thinking I'd scroll past it and close the app, but a few new comments on a post from months ago made me pause. It was a photo of a coffee with a simple caption, "Slow Morning." I hadn't thought much of it when I posted it, but now unfamiliar names left comments that I couldn't quite understand. Someone asked if I was still bragging about my coffee shop chain. Another mocked, "Still hand-making drinks with 21 stores. What a humble CEO." I read a few lines and went quiet. There was a strange tightness creeping into my chest. Just then, Luca, the barista on shift, walked up to me. He held his phone out gently and said, with concern in his voice, "You should see this. I think you need to know." I took the phone right away. A newly posted video from a group called Family Drama was on the screen. The first image froze me. It was Aunt Lauren's living room during today's lunch party. The clip had been trimmed down. It only kept the part where I said I co-founded 21 coffee shops. Right after that came the wave of laughter, the mocking voices of my relatives and my father yelling, "Get out of here and don't ever show your face again, you reeking disgrace." Then I looked up at the title. It was bold and clear at the top of the post. Madison Hart claims to own 21 coffee shops, gets kicked out for lying. As I scrolled down, the view count was climbing fast. So were the comments. Most came from people I'd never met, but they wrote as if they knew exactly who I was. I handed the phone back to Luca. At that moment, I didn't feel sad. I felt something all too familiar. When people don't know the whole story, they always believe the loudest part. 20 minutes later, I had to shut down all my social media accounts. I wasn't interested in arguing with strangers who had too much time on their hands. At that point, I figured staying silent was my best decision. My phone rang right after locking down all my social media accounts. It was Brian. I had barely set my coffee cup down when his name lit up on the screen. I answered, and his voice came through almost instantly, fast and urgent. "Did you hear about what people are saying about you?" I replied right away, my tone calm. "Yeah, I saw it." There was a pause on the other end. Then Brian spoke again, this time with apparent disbelief. "You saw it and you're still this calm?" I took a slow breath, my eyes still focused on the window in front of me, and said, "What do you want me to do?" "Give it a few days. This will blow over." As soon as I said that, Brian's voice burst through again with frustration he didn't bother to hide. "I swear, Madison, you drive me crazy sometimes." And before I could say anything else, he hung up. I didn't blame Brian. I knew exactly why he was upset. This wasn't the first time he had gotten angry at how quiet I could be and how I let things slide that he thought deserved a response. But I'm not like him. For me, not everything calls for a reaction. Sometimes silence is the only way I know how to protect whatever peace I have left. The next morning, while I was in the kitchen making breakfast, my phone buzzed softly on the counter. It was a message from Brian. I opened it right away. It was short, just like his usual text, with only one line. "I took care of it for you." Right below was a link. It led straight to the family drama group, the same group that had spread the edited video of me the day before. I tapped the link. A new video had just been posted less than 20 minutes ago. Brian was the one in the video. He was sitting inside one of our coffee shops, with the brand's logo visible behind him. The video didn't have any fancy edits or effects, it was just a simple phone recording, but his voice was steady and direct. In the clip, he said, "Her name is Madison Hart. She co-founded a chain of 21 coffee shops currently operating in 5 states. This is the business license. These are photos of the stores we built together over the last 5 years. This is an interview we did that was published in a national coffee industry magazine last year." He held each paper up to the camera, every image, every number, and every quote laid out clearly. At the end of the video, Brian looked straight into the lens. His voice slowed down, and each word came through clear and firm. "She doesn't owe anyone an explanation, but I think it's time people heard the truth." After watching the entire video, I sat and stared at the screen. Not because I was emotional, but because I knew Brian would never have made that video or posted it publicly unless he was furious on my behalf. Right after that, I sent him a message. "Thank you for everything you did." After messaging Brian, I went back to the video and scrolled through the comments below it. The post had already drawn thousands of views and shares in just 30 minutes. There were no loud laughs or mocking nicknames this time like the day before, but that didn't mean everyone was on my side. Some people spoke up for me and commented clearly and straightforwardly. Editing a video just to humiliate someone is one of the lowest things a family member can do. Another person wrote, "I don't know this woman, but her friend showed paperwork and a published interview. Seems legit to me." Still, a few accounts raised doubts. "Why stay silent yesterday and only come out with proof now? Feels a little too convenient." Someone else added, "Sure, the facts are there, but the way she talked at the party did feel a bit arrogant." Reading those comments, I was not surprised. I knew social media was not a place to settle truth and lies. It only shows one thing clearly: who controls the story. In the days that followed, I went back to my usual routine. I still had the habit of dropping by one of our coffee shops unannounced, standing near the bar for a few minutes, asking a question or two, and then quietly leaving. I've done this for the past 5 years. Nothing had changed. I thought the storm had passed, but exactly 1 week later, it returned. This time, it came from the 2 people I least wanted to see: my father and my sister. I still remember it clearly. It was a Tuesday around 9 o'clock in the morning. I was going over the payroll sheet when my phone rang. My father's name appeared on the screen. I did not hesitate. I hit decline immediately. Less than a minute later, a message came through. Your dad and Brody are waiting at the Portland store. If you don't show up, I'll keep coming back. I stared at the message. I was not surprised. But instead of avoiding them, I decided to go, not to talk, but to hear what they wanted. 30 minutes later, I arrived at the cafe. When I walked in, they were already seated in the back left corner, the most low-key spot in the shop. When they saw me, they stood up right away, their faces stiff and uneasy. The first thing my father said was, "I'm sorry about the other day." Right after that, Brody nodded quickly and added, "Me too, I'm sorry." I looked straight at them and replied with one short line, "Say what you came to say." I didn't have to ask twice. Brody jumped in immediately, her voice flat, without any emotion. "We're still family. Can you give me and Dad 10% of the company? Or, if not that, maybe transfer one store to each of us. You know how it is. Dad's getting old, and my job doesn't pay well." I didn't respond right away. 5 minutes passed before I finally looked up. I stared straight into their eyes and said just one thing. "Go home and wait to hear from my lawyer." As soon as those words left my mouth, I could see the change in their faces. My father leaned back in his chair. Brody looked at me with shock and what almost looked like relief. They thought I had agreed. They thought paperwork was coming their way. But they didn't know that what they were about to receive would shock them more than anything they were expecting. Right after they left the coffee shop, I called Eric, the legal representative for the coffee chain Brian and I co-owned. I told him exactly what had just happened. No extra words, no detours. When I finished explaining, Eric's voice came steady and firm on the other end. "Leave it to me. I know what to do. It'll be done in 2 days." I didn't ask anything else. I knew him well. When Eric said 2 days, he didn't mean 2.5. He meant not a minute late. And he was right. 2 days later, early in the morning, my phone rang again. It was Eric, this time with his usual report-style tone. "The letter has been delivered as requested. The originals were handed directly to them, with full confirmation." I thanked him and said nothing more. But deep down, I already had a feeling about what would happen next. And I was right. That same afternoon, while I was in the office reviewing inventory reports, the phone rang again. This time, it was my father. I answered because I wanted to hear what his tone would be. When I picked up, his voice snapped through the line, sharp and angry. "You bastard, is this how you treat your father?" I replied slowly and clearly, every word deliberate. "I don't have a father. You've got the wrong person, and don't forget what my lawyer instructed." I didn't wait for his reaction. I hung up immediately. Then I opened my contacts and blocked his and Brody's numbers. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it because I understood exactly where his rage came from. It wasn't from pain, it was from disappointment. They had expected a transfer form, a share, a last-minute concession from me. But what they held in their hands was a legally binding no-contact order, accompanied by a formal cease and desist letter from Eric. The language was crystal clear. The legal team would begin litigation if they continued interfering or disrupting any part of the coffee chain's operations. And if that happened, even selling the house Brody held the title to wouldn't be enough to cover the damages. The days that followed were the first ones that truly felt peaceful. No more unknown calls early in the morning. No more tension every time my phone buzzed. No more cautious glances from people who once called me family. I went to work, stopped by the shops, sat in my usual corner with a cup of coffee just hot enough, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about who might show up out of nowhere. Some would say I was being too harsh, that I should have been more forgiving and open, that I should have let it go for the sake of family. But sometimes, forgiveness isn't about letting things slide. It's about knowing exactly when to stop. I didn't cut anyone off. I just stopped leaving the door wide open. Not everyone who walks in deserves to stay. I also learned something through my mistakes. Don't rush to share your success, especially with people who don't ask out of care, but out of calculation. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It's the best shield to protect the things that truly matter. It took me a long time to understand this. Peace doesn't come from having control over everything. It comes when you finally stop letting the wrong things into your life. And before I wrap up today's story, I want to leave you with a question. This one is for you, the listener who stayed with me until the last minute. If you were in my shoes at that Christmas party in Aunt Lauren's house, surrounded by relatives throwing jabs and mocking comments, when everyone looked at you like you were nothing more than someone with an ordinary job, What would you have done? Would you have stood up like I did and said the truth out loud, that you are the co-founder of 21 coffee shops, and let the facts speak for themselves? Or would you have stayed silent, taken the mockery, and kept to yourself the peace you have worked so hard to protect all these years? Leave your thoughts in the comments below the story. I would love to hear them. And if anything I shared today felt familiar, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so we can meet again in the next story. Thank you for listening.